Hey, everybody, pull up a seat. I have just topped off my glass. Why don't you grab your favorite beverage and join me? This is the Paddy Wagon. Welcome into the Paddy Wagon, everybody. Today we are joined by Justin Leff, who has been doing a little bit of a dive into the impact of social media and how we communicate as humans. He does it all, not just this, but really helps folks deal with a variety of topics, confidence, self-esteem, discipline, productivity, and depression, and a lot of other things as well. But today, I think because we could probably be here for 5 hours talking about those things, I'd like to focus in on what social media does to us. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, these are really kind of reshaping the way we have conversations as human beings. It's affecting our relationships and sometimes even, unfortunately, our sense of self-worth. So, like to break down some of these trends and things that we're seeing. And again, Justin, welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Did I leave anything out? I know there's a ton more. I was on your website. I'm like, this guy literally does everything.
Well, no, I mean, you gave me a pretty generous intro. I think that, what I call what I do behavioral awareness coaching. So, that just helps people with the kind of stuff that you mentioned. So whether it's motivation or procrastination or adaptive thinking, or even sometimes pretty deep mental health issues, if that's relevant. And what I always say is, if it wasn't such a silly title, I would call myself thought partner, because that's literally what I do. I just sit down with people and I reflect with them on ways that we can help get them where they want to be.
When did I have to laugh and thank you for not saying thought partner, because that's one of those new terms that it's almost getting to the point where it's overused, and it's such a great term. It really is, thought partner, but it's now everyone's a thought partner. You go on LinkedIn and you look, thought partner, thought partner, thought partner.
Yeah. I mean, the same, it's true with coaching as well, though, right? I mean, I when I was starting my practice, I was desperate to find a word other than coach that I could use to call myself, because the word has so much baggage at this point. But there's nothing wrong with the word itself. It's just that it gets this association, and we can't invent new words every time we don't like the way other people use them.
Yeah, very
right?
true.
So.
Very true. I'm a little upset, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to blame you for something that's going to happen in my life. You said procrastination, and my wife's going to listen to this episode, and she's going to say, I think you should book a session with this gentleman, because you are a man of much procrastination. I'll get to it, babe. Leave a note on the fridge, babe. I'm that guy.
Yeah, I think almost everybody is these days. I mean, I think that we're evolving in an environment that we're not, born with the tools to really deal with. Anything digital is just such a monster of a procrastination risk.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an issue that I see getting worse and worse and worse. And it's gone from, procrastination is no longer this little word that describes when we feel like we're not doing as much work as we could. It is something that is literally like consuming people's lives at this point. I think we're going to see more and more research around the seriousness of intervening on chronic procrastination issues, because it's no longer this little thing. It's it's a really big problem now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see why. I mean, like I said, it doesn't affect me in the way where it's bad, but I could see how it really could affect people's lives in like a really negative way. My stuff's like the honey-do list, all right? And it's like, put that stuff off. But I know other people, they may have it a little worse with that. So,
and part of the problem, I think, is that procrastination is, less of just this standalone issue that is growing out of places, but it's kind of the main way that we're identifying issues now.
Yeah.
Right. So I think most people who have done a little bit of research procrastination kind of understand that it's really this manifested behavior of when other issues are going on underneath. Right.
Okay.
But procrastination is now becoming more and more dominant in how it takes over the way that we mask issues that we're having. Right. So it can literally replace drug addiction. Right.
Really?
If you have problems in your life. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are people who are addicted to procrastinating on their phone in a way where in some other life they would just drink alcohol.
Wow.
right? Like procrastination can absolutely help you mask issues that you have, or sort of issues that you have with areas in your life in the same way that any kind of drug or addiction can, for sure.
That's an interesting point. And I'll get into you lead right into the next topic about asking what you're going to have tonight. I know it's not alcohol, but on that note, you will see people, right, when they get into recovery and they're I know nobody's ever fully recovered, and it's a constant thing for them to stay sober and to stay clean. But you'll notice that's a really interesting point. But you notice that people are different. That addiction piece is gone, and you say, what are they doing now to kind of fill that void? Because I heard a long time ago, and it seems to make sense, but I've heard things like, it's sex, drugs, rock and roll, like all these things. The addiction piece is the same part of the brain. It doesn't matter what the addiction is. It's the same part of your brain, which I've always taken as true. Is that fair?
Yeah, it absolutely is fair. I think that there's a there's a lot of mixed research on it, but there's definitely an opinion regarding addiction that physical addiction is not really that useful as a way to think of addiction, because really it's about what substances do for you, and then you have a physical relationship with this substance that solves problems for you. And procrastination can solve problems for you in the exact same way, or anything else that we talk about. So addiction is really about this perception that this thing that you're addicted to is going to help you in that immediate moment, or that you have behaviors from when that was once the case, right? So this is one of the huge problems with addiction, is that like that instinctual need to engage in this addictive behavior is not directly correlated with the benefits that behavior gives you anymore. And I think anybody who's been in addiction is going to identify with that really, really hard. If you're an alcoholic, you're not drinking alcohol because you necessarily think that it's going to be this amazing experience that'll get rid of all your problems. It's because you're just drawn to that behavior, even if while you're doing it, like this isn't really going to give me what I need right now.
Right.
So, the fact that the behavioral loop can be independent of the, percepted like reward of engaging in that behavior.
Oh, wow.
Is an important thing to understand when it comes to addiction.
That's interesting. I hate to talk about alcoholism and addiction and then go to my next question for me, which I
yeah, sorry, it feels like I'm attacking you on your podcast where you open up with drinking.
No, well, listen,
but I was just as an example.
No, it's a great one. And I will say that, fortunately for me, I love the taste of alcohol. I mean, I would tell you this. When I would have cigarettes a long time ago, I don't think I had that addiction piece. I could smoke a pack of cigarettes on a golf trip or something like that and then never touch another one. And my friends would be like, dude, how do you do that? And I just would always say, and I don't know if it's true, but I would say, I don't think I have that addiction piece. I like the podcast that we kind of do, because I think that, and probably kind of alluding to what you're saying, I've always seen alcohol as a way for a lot of people kind of loosen up the conversation, right? So let's sit back, have a drink. I'm learning that a lot of my guests don't drink now, which is good. So maybe we can find somebody come on and do a podcast about the effects of drinking as a podcast host. But you did let me know that you're a water guy. Are you the guy like me that would drink out of a fire hose growing up? Or do you have a preference?
I know you're saying that as a joke, but the second you say that, I literally just start thinking about how good water out of a hose tastes.
So good. So good.
But, for me, I think I'm addicted to tap water at this point. I mean, luckily I live in a city where the tap water quality is pretty good. I also have a filter, but for me, it was more so just about the fact that if I was thirsty, there wasn't anything in the fridge.
Where are you from?
I was born in Toronto, and I lived there until I was about 20, and then now I'm out in Halifax. I moved with my family.
Oh, very cool. Nova Scotia, correct?
Then. Yeah, very East Coast. Like an hour. We actually have our own time zone. I'm an hour ahead of Eastern people.
Awesome. Very cool.
So very East Coast.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm a water fan. It's funny, I did say that joking, but when we were playing outside as kids, it was grab the fire hose. I keep saying fire hose, not fire hose, garden hose. What am I talking about? Although some would spray like they were a fire hose, but I grew up with that, and the key is to let it run for a minute, spray some of that funky hose water out, and then I always found that to be one of the best beverages ever. Is because you're so thirsty when you're running around or you're doing yard work or whatever the case is. I would still do it. I don't think I've done it in a while. But no, I did for my drink today. I did Wife's Choice. It was the first time I've ever done that. My wife and I, when she was pregnant with our son, we took a little baby moon, I think they call it. We went down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and for those people that do drink, kind of there's I don't know if they call it a bourbon belt or whatever, but like a lot of things, they're regional, right? So I went to this liquor store and I said, "Hey, what do you have that I can't get where I live?" And the guy gave me something called Rowan's Creek, which is kind of looks like a little handmade thing that a kid drew a map on, but it is by Willett Distillery, and I am going to try it. I had a little smell. It smelled good. And yeah, that's not bad. Not bad. I like mine with ice. I will drink something neat every once in a while, but I just like water down, pour me a glass, have one, and that's about it. So that is the extent pretty much of the alcohol in this show. Is that right there? I've had folks that are like, "Do you just get bombed on the show?" And it's like, no, the opposite of that, if there is such a thing. It's just a beverage that I have. So thank you for joining me with your tap water. I think tap water builds character. I do mean that because
I hope so.
I will tell you this, my kids, I think if I gave them tap water, they would look at me like I scooped it out of the toilet. And I am old school. I go right over, I get the tap water. I don't need ice. I don't need anything. I just drink out of the bathroom sink with my hands. Like that's how I roll.
Well, one thing I might not appreciate is that, I know people that live in like LA and they're like, they literally do not trust the trap water. They think it'll kill them. so maybe I take for granted that I grew up in like a place where there wasn't this phobia of pipe quality.
That's fair. That's fair. Because me and you are not drinking water in Flint, Michigan. And like, seriously, not true, to make a joke about it, but that's a bad situation there, man. So, lucky for me, I'm in Pittsburgh. Few boroughs where you tend to have a lot of pipes that rupture due to the old infrastructure. Next thing you know, there's a boil water alert. But overall, yeah, you can pretty much drink tap water anywhere around here that I've been, at least. So, all right, on from the drinks. As you mentioned, you work with folks in a lot of different areas, and I've had a lot of people on the show, and we've talked about things like ADHD and depression and other ailments, but we've never really done a deep dive into social media. And it's something that I noticed a while back. And again, I'm not some sort of pioneer here by noticing this, but it changes people. And, speaking of which, make sure you follow Justin on YouTube, Instagram, and check out his website at soliliumcoaching.com. Right. And it's like, jokes aside, there's such good tools and resources for people like us where you want to get your word out. It's free advertising. You get out of it what you put into it. But there's baggage with these platforms, if you will. When would you say you noticed we may have a serious problem with a lot of these platforms?
I don't want to sound like too pretentious, but honestly, I like 12 years old. I remember,
that's good. That's good.
I remember because I used to play a lot of online games when I was younger. And I have these really distinct memories of literally being like 13, 12 years old, where I remember looking at the way people behaving and thinking like there is something really interesting about what's going on here. I remember really young being interested, lucky me now that for a living I get to do like psychology research. I remember when I was really young, I used to think, I wish somebody would make a documentary about online worlds because they are their own little ecosystems.
They really are.
That satisfy our social needs in a way that just really quickly takes over your lives. Because one day you're just logging in to play a video game online because it's fun, and the next you're invested in like a community and rewards and storylines that are happening in this space that doesn't physically exist. And just the difference in behavior and the type of things people get away with in a way that's much deeper than the typical, like, don't feed the trolls type shit.
Yeah, right.
Because people kind of know that sort of stuff, but yeah, like really paying attention to the way that the internet allows us to change how we behave, I think is something that I've always kind of been dialed into, honestly. like ever since I had a computer.
It's it's disturbing what people think that they can get away with, and a lot of times they do. I think the internet is such a great tool, and especially now with a lot of the AI things, you see the Chat GPT. There's a lot of things that we can do where it makes our lives better. But that gaming example is fantastic. I mean, I'll share a story with you, and I can't use certain words because it would get me get me canceled or whatever we want to call it. But I remember a specific. I was playing a game, and a young kid was on, and now I'm pretty computer savvy, so he says pretty much every word about every race and about every sexual preference and about everything you could imagine. And you're like, wow, this is a young kid talking like this. And you go, one, he doesn't realize what he's saying. He knows he's saying it, but he doesn't realize the words that are coming out of his mouth because he's young. So I did a quick Google search, found his gamer tag, took his gamer tag, found his YouTube channel, found his YouTube channel somehow had something with his address on it. And I called him by his first name, and I said, and I remember his name was Danny. And I said, Danny, listen to me, my friend. I'm going to teach you a little something right now. And I told him, I said, I know where you're from, and I'll give you the address. I'm not going to say anything else because there's other people listening. You need to be real careful with how you communicate online with people. I know you're trying to be funny, and I know you're trying to be cute, and I'm looking at a video of you right now dancing in your living room. And this kid froze, and you could hear the fear in his voice. And I said, do know that there are bad people out there, dude. You got a lot of information that was very easy for me to find. Be better. Don't be that guy. Yeah. And I hope it changed his life in a way because, again, you could hear it. He was just blurting it out, man. And you're like, wow, that's a really nasty little kid in this moment.
Yeah, I think what a good example of how the internet, but maybe more specifically like anonym, like the ability to be anonymous. I can't say that word right now for some reason.
It's always a tough one. It's N's and M's next to one another.
Yeah, how it allows us to subvert our emotions, right? Because if you think about it, that kind of fear is something that fear isn't like necessarily this horrible thing. We're supposed to feel it, right? Like feelings are what is supposed to guide us away and towards certain behaviors.
Right.
And so in a real life setting, you would think that level of fear would stop him from doing these ridiculous things because it helps him understand that this isn't socially acceptable, but he just gets to completely subvert it. And what you do is you bring it back into focus for him. Right. And, I say this as somebody where if you were somehow able to take a magic wand and dig into my like internet past, you could probably find things that would make it so that I could never run for office a day in my life.
Oh, dude, me and you both, my friend. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think almost everybody is like that, right? So I say this as somebody who would be like destroyed by a policy like this. But I do think that we kind of protect the idea of being anonymous maybe a bit too much, right? Especially as people kind of refer to the internet as kind of like the new town square.
Right.
Well, you can't go into a new town square with a mask over your head and start screaming things. Like this ability to be anonymous is something that is completely unique to the last 20 years of our civilization.
Yeah.
Right? To have like this level of like direct interaction with no face to what you're saying. And, even speaking of games, I remember one guy telling me that there was like this online racing game he used to play where you actually had to input your real name. They had some sort of like ID verification.
Oh, that's fantastic.
For some reason. And it was by far the most polite gaming community in the world,
good pass,
right?
Buddy.
And so I more of like just a straight up personal opinion, but I do think we protect being anonymous a bit too much. I understand that there's a lot of issues that come into play with like, free speech and politics and all that stuff, but just the sort of like how the personal, like individual behavioral level of
right.
it, I do think that it's easy to leverage in a way that harms you long term.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it requires work, right? So all of those checks and balances can be put into those games, just as simple as that one was. Hey, you want to play this game? You're going to go ahead and sign up, and you're going to do this. And once you do this and we verify this, you're more than welcome to play. People were very kind. People were courteous. Hey, good pass there, buddy. And, in America, right, obviously we stand behind our right, our First Amendment, right? We can say whatever we want, whenever we want, wherever we want. That is not what that means, right? I don't have the ability to come onto YouTube or onto this podcast or into any, social media platform and start screaming whatever I feel like. screaming hate, racism, homophobe, whatever it is, there's places where that stops, and people don't realize that's not what the freedom of speech protects you from. And so, one, from an education piece, I think it'd be great to have people, one, just educated on what that means. Maybe two, when it's applicable, when it's good to stand behind that, and so on. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea of maybe more of these games having checks like that, because, my son recently started doing things on YouTube, and he's a kid. You monitor what he does, and, you don't hover over top of him. But one of the things I told him was like, listen, do your thing. I think you're creative with your videos that you make. I enjoy watching them. They're funny. I get to see you be creative, and I enjoy that. Don't read the comments. Disable comments, buddy, because you're going to not like some of the things people will say for no reason other than the fact that they can say it and not get in trouble for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's such a big issue in the way that information, because think about the difference in, I don't know if you want to call it a power dynamic, but the difference between when you're putting your face and your name and your creativity at risk, and then somebody with the username like dog77, like it's something that they're completely anonymous, like it identifies nothing about them, and they get to put out their opinion in isolation. And you don't know the context, you don't know why they said it, you don't know who they are, how old they are, where they're from, what's motivated. Like there's such a lack of context when we receive information from social media compared to the way that we engage with it.
Yeah.
And it creates such this damaging effect on our mental health when that happens, because such a big part of mental health is the ability to like navigate the world around you mentally, right, and make sense of what's going on. Right. We evolved to be able to obtain information from voice pitch and facial expressions and body language. But now I just have to look at these little symbols on a screen and decide how much does that, like how much weight am I going to give that? Like, what's the context I apply that to? I have to invent my own stories. Like, I have to create my own narratives to make peace with that information, or to try and decide what that information is going to motivate me to do. And it kind of like induces this artificial, what's kind of called like cognitive distortions, okay, where you have a really hard time, where you basically blow things out of proportion, I think is maybe the easiest way to say it, right? It's really important to be able to evaluate information in the context that it was kind of made available to you. And the internet really hurts our ability to do that, especially when you're younger, I think.
That's interesting because, it actually kind of ties into one of my next questions, which was, I think there's an obvious statement here, but, it's changed, like and you're talking about it, the way we communicate with people, right? And the term I would use is kind of pre-digital times, and the things that we think about now, the things that affect us now, they didn't affect us before because they didn't exist, right? So, I mean, what's your opinion on some of those kind of major things in how we communicate, other than the fact that it's done via a digital medium?
Yeah, I think honestly, when you ask me this question, the thing that comes to mind is that there's a difference between things that because when you think back to like a telephone in say 1990, a telephone is a piece of technology that allows you to communicate information about the real world more efficiently across like some digital line or whatever. This isn't what's happening anymore. Like the internet is, for all intents and purposes, a physical space. Right. Like earlier I mentioned how people kind of think of it as like the new town square, where if you want to get an opinion out, you don't walk into your local like market and shout something out. You go on Twitter and you tweet something. And so, yeah, we're no longer just communicating across technology. It's that technology is, at the very least, supplementing the way that we would use physical spaces, right? So I think that's like a really important aspect of it to understand, is that it is its own environment. It's its own ecosystem. It's not just a piece of technology that we're communicating along anymore. So when I think about social media, I don't even really think about it as a communication tool. I think about it as this shared park that's adjacent to all of our houses that we get to walk into.
It's really funny you say that. Starting the show, Facebook and Instagram and, there's TikTok and all these different things. And I'm like, okay, I can do one of these. And if there's a tool that exists, which they're out there, where I can put one thing out and it will share it across all those platforms, great, I'll use that. The less I have to do is better for me, because of how much I quite honestly, I don't like social media. I use it, but I do feel it pulling. It pulls you in. And one of the things, and this goes with what you said, I referred to, and I'm gonna swear here. So I referred to Twitter, which is now X, as a fucking cesspool. I hate that place. I said I hate that place. It's a cesspool. Yeah. I referred to it as a place, which is very bizarre, and I didn't realize it until you just said that. It is its own ecosystem. Wow.
It absolutely is. I think a good example of this is, because I know you, before we started recording, we were talking about Discord a little bit.
Right.
Like you threw Discord in there. What does Discord have now? It has activities. It has like screen sharing. Like Discord is literally like a movie theater, an arcade, a mall, a high school hallway, and a telephone all in one.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's not. It's social, and people don't really think about Discord as social media, but a lot of people are like, oh, Facebook's tanking my mental health. Like, I don't use Facebook anymore. And then they spend hours every day on Discord.
It's the same.
So, yeah, it's the same thing. It just takes on a different shape. So it absolutely is a place, right? And there are people who are like, what do I want to do? And then they get on social media and they wait for it to present something that they can do. It's literally the same thing as like hanging out at the mall, right?
So bizarre when you hear it said like that. Yeah. It is so weird. And it's like, no wonder older people have a really hard time grasping this. I'm 45 and I can't wrap my head around it. And I don't know how old you are, but it's really bizarre when you think of things in that context, or you kind of use analogies like that, where you think about it like a mall, and then a lot of people don't. And it's weird, man. And I've said a couple times here that there is value to these things. That's how we met. That's how you connected with me. And I think it was Reddit, right? Where you saw.
Absolutely, yeah.
I love Reddit.
Reddit's an amazing tool. Like information. I mean, I don't really think I need to explain the obvious benefits of the internet. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I have to laugh at that.
The internet's really useful.
It's really useful for a lot of things.
But yeah, sorry.
That's funny. It helps us connect. And I'm now sitting here laughing with somebody who, prior to that communication in that email you sent me, I didn't know existed. I didn't know. Yeah. I didn't know who you were. Didn't know there was anything out there. And then this, you reached out, you press send or submit or whatever it is, and here we are laughing and having a conversation. There's benefits to that. People get married and have new lifelong friends over.
I was about to mention that. Like, I know people who've gotten married and they met online.
It's good. There's so much good out there, but in a way, it kind of erodes real life connections. I think it's if you let it, right? So we used to count friends. Well, I mean, we didn't. Now we count everything. But when you look back, you'd go, I have friends. Like I have 2, 3 really good friends, 4 really good friends. And now we look at it as likes and follows. And they're not the same. You and I know those two things are not the same, but especially in younger people, it feels the same. Well, people didn't like my comment. They didn't click the little heart emoji. They didn't comment. They didn't tell me good job. And so how do you kind of breach that topic with people that can't differentiate between what is a friend, what is a real life friend, and what is just somebody clicking a mouse once that can have damaging and lasting effects on somebody's mental state?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of touched on it earlier when I said something called like a cognitive distortion, which is, me kind of broadly applying a concept in a way that I think is relevant here, where when someone likes a video, it's, especially when you're a young person, right? When we're talking about vulnerable groups, which I kind of think of as, young people and old people, like people in that wide end of the spectrum, where old people who are sort of not familiar with the technology, and then younger people who don't have a healthy relationship with the technology quite yet. And when somebody clicks like on a video, or doesn't click like on a video, it's really hard for somebody who doesn't quite understand the context of that technology to really properly think about what it means when somebody does or doesn't click that button. Right? Because especially young people, I think, are going to the platform with like lots of motivations, right? They want to get famous, or they want to be validated, or they have low self-esteem, like whatever it is that's driving them to really crave this sort of acknowledgement on an online platform. And so the like means so much more to them than it possibly does to the person that's clicking it, right? Like we live in a world of shorts. We're spending 15 seconds on a video, scrolling to the next one. If it made me kind of smile a little bit, I hit like, and then I scroll next, and I literally forget it exists 10 seconds later. And yet, right, you can look at this and you can be like, oh my God, this person loves my stuff. Like I'm amazing. Like it can have so much value to the person that's putting out, and that disconnect is a little bit obvious when you say it. I don't think that that's a super hard concept for people to grasp, but making that available as a consideration to people that place a lot of weight on what likes and follows and subscriber counts actually mean is really, really important. Because they have unhealthy kind of like styles of attribution towards it, right?
Yep.
So when something happens to you, like how representative is this of how the world will think of me in general? Like how permanent is this going to be? How much does this need to motivate a difference in who I am and what I do? Like it has a lot of implications for how somebody feels and what they think they need to do when they get a like or a follow, but to the person giving it means almost nothing.
Yeah.
and sort of teaching people that difference can take a lot of the like artificial anxiety out of the situation for them.
Wow. You touched on something there that was actually I kind of wanted to ask, which I think is really cool. We flow well together in that way. I'm picking up on that. So because you're kind of jumping around on things that I'm already thinking, and I like that. Talking about platforms and information, and we laughed a couple seconds ago and we talked about, there's information out there on the internet. Wow, that's crazy. I learned to fly fish from YouTube. I have learned to fix plumbing issues around my house from YouTube. I've learned to make amazing things on my grill, flat top, and smoker from YouTube. And it's so useful. And it's so awesome for people that make content because they're doing it in a way it's like, I want to show other people how to do things. I want to be helpful. And what you just said is a lot of these things, right? I used to watch YouTube videos that were 45 minutes long. I watched this guy he was a Canadian guy, actually. Joe Robinet or something like that. I guess if he was French, it would have been Robinet. I don't know. But he would do bushcraft, and he'd go out into the woods and the forest, and he'd camp and build sites. And one of the comments one guy wrote was, I have cancer, and your videos help me sleep. They relax me. I enjoy your voice. I enjoy you being in nature. And it's like, well, that's a really deep comment and shows the value of the internet. Now, to jump back to my point, because I'm scatterbrained probably because of the internet. You touched on shorts and clips where we are inundated with 10 to 15 seconds of, quite frankly, just bullshit that we'll never see again, we'll never think about again. But it sounds like you know as well as I do, you can grab your phone and you grab any one of these platforms that promotes videos of that type, and you look up and you're like, my God, it's been 45 minutes and I've been clicking and sliding my thumb up. Does that increase ADHD? Does that tie in with ADHD? Because it feels like it would.
The short answer is no.
Okay.
But there's some there's some considerations there for sure. ADHD is pretty much agreed upon as like a hereditary thing at this point.
Okay.
So what's not going to happen is you're not going to go on Instagram or TikTok and spend so much time there that all of a sudden your brain has ADHD. However, it can increase symptoms of ADHD for sure. And to stay on ADHD for a second, I think that also you'll probably find, like, I don't know if there's information on this yet, but I would expect that the research is going to reflect pretty soon that spending a lot of time on social media is going to perhaps make it harder for people to outgrow ADHD. So, like, I've seen estimates anywhere from 15% to about 33%. Like 1 in 6 to like 1 in 3 people will outgrow their ADHD by adulthood, right? When it presents in childhood. Wow. Now, the vast majority of people continue to present ADHD into their adulthood, but there's like a sizable minority that will outgrow it. And I think you'll find that the internet or exposure to short form content is probably going to reduce people's abilities to do so. And the reason for that is because it's not just that ADHD is this disorder that affects your brain, it's the consequences of it. So the example that I use often is like, let's say that you're, practicing football, like you're on a football team, and you have some sort of issue with your lungs where you have 70% of the stamina as all the other kids on your team, right? That doesn't mean that you're going to be at 70% capacity. It means you're going to be much worse because you can't do certain really long form kinds of training. You can't keep up with your friends that are training as much. So it doesn't hit you by 30%. It hits you by much, much more.
Okay.
Right? So that's one of the biggest effects of ADHD is that your ability to sort of regulate yourself, your ability to perform executive functions and all the problems that come with ADHD are made worse by the fact that you have it, right? It has like this compounding interest issue. And you can see that in people that don't have ADHD as well. If you aren't taught how to delay rewards, if you aren't taught like proper self-discipline, if you aren't taught long-term priorities, like these sort of skills, these are issues if you're not taught them early on, if you have ADHD or if you don't. So I think that what you see is that it kind of induces a lot of the shared issues that people with ADHD that are considered symptoms of ADHD, right? Mm-hmm. So I think in a sense you could say that it is kind of increasing ADHD in the population, but it's not inducing the disorder itself because the disorder itself is hereditary.
That's news to me, by the way. I enjoy this podcast more because I just learned something new. I had no idea that ADHD was hereditary, but it's not hereditary in the sense that, like, if my son has it, that doesn't necessarily mean I have it and show symptoms of it, right? Is it like, can it kind of be hidden?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, one thing that's funny about ADHD is I think that if a parent has ADHD, or I think that if your first sibling has ADHD, like if you have a child and your first child has ADHD, your second child is more likely to have it. Or if you have ADHD, it's more likely to present in the third. It's kind of has the same. I'm not an expert on this topic, to be honest with you, but I've seen these things across, like in terms of like the actual like hereditary ways that it passes on. But there are definitely, it's kind of like hair color, okay? Right? Like I'm the first blonde person in my family for like 2 generations for some weird reason. So
what does everyone else have?
My mom has like, she was I think blonde when she was younger, but she like grew out of it. And then my dad is like really black hair. And then like everyone on my dad's side has black hair. And then my mom's like grandfather had like my hair basically. But like things can pass on. Like I look exactly like my mom's.
I'm going to cut you off real quick because I need to say this. This is an audio only podcast for all of the people who do not have the pleasure of looking at this handsome gentleman right now. This dude has the best hair. Like it is like, it's almost like hockey hair, right? I know you're from Canada, and but like if you watch the hockey,
dude, whenever I go to a foreign country, people say it to me. Say you have hair like a hockey player.
You have great hair.
I'm like, I think you're just saying that because I'm Canadian.
You have great hair. My dad would hate your guts and like you at the same time. That bald bastard. By the way, he loves listening to this, so he's going to get a kick out of that one. But Dad, I'm telling you, this guy's hair is fantastic. I will show you a picture. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, what the hell was I saying?
We were talking about. You said you look like your mom. And you were the first in a couple generations.
Sorry. Genetics can pass on in weird ways. Like they can skip and they can pass on based on certain siblings. So ADHD is like that as well. But it definitely is hereditary. Like obviously this is one of the best sources of information in psychology research or any kind of research, honestly, period, is twin studies.
Okay.
So it absolutely is like a hereditary thing. The way that it passes on, I'm not going to try and give 2 specific examples of because I don't really focus on like the genetics or the neuroscience of ADHD as much as I do focus on like the behavioral consequences of it. But yeah, it is. I can tell you for sure that it's hereditary.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. But it's a neurodevelopmental delay, right? So it's when your sort of ability to perform executive functions, which are kind of like basically acts of self-control, you develop more slowly than the rest of the people around you. And that normals out by the time you're in your late adulthood, in theory. But again, the problem is that you have all those consequences behind you by the time you get there.
How much of the population has ADHD? Because the more I learn about it, which again, apparently is up to this point of this conversation, I've always kind of thought, dude, everyone has it. We all have it. I remember being a kid and you hear somebody who's got ADHD and I want to go, show me a fucking kid that doesn't. right? No kid pays attention. And I know that that's not fair, and it's almost kind of ignorant to say when somebody, because I would believe that there's some really some people that are affected by ADHD to the point of where it's debilitating, right? Like there's, I would assume, a spectrum, right? You've got autism. There's the spectrum where you could sit here and have a conversation and you're like, oh, I didn't know that person was autistic. And then you meet somebody else and you're like, whoa.
But it's also the relevance of what it has on your life, right? Like if you think about what it would be like to, I don't know, live off in the woods, versus being somebody who has to function in like a really high, like, you know, high energy corporate environments. ADHD is going to affect these two people differently. On the topic of can it be debilitating? Absolutely. Like ADHD can be just as consequential as having like any other disorder, like having schizophrenia or autism. It's just that being in a position where it can affect your life is really kind of what makes it go from this thing that ruins your life to this thing that you can kind of get away without really giving
like
a lot
you
of
manage it.
to. Yeah, absolutely. And I, you know, to answer your question earlier, sorry, it's about 5 to 10% of the population has ADHD. And that basically just changes on whether or not it's an environment where it's likely to get diagnosed or not. Right. Wow. So if you want to just average that, like maybe 7.5% of the population is estimated to have it. It's overdiagnosed in some areas. It's underdiagnosed in other areas. And the diagnosis aspect of it's the whole other can of worms.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And so, you know, kind of back to social media and how that connects with these, you know, kind of cognitive things that we go through. There's emotional consequences, I think, too, that can connect, and it's like anxiety, loneliness, a sense of being disconnected, right? They're not all connected, but then they're kind of all connected. I mean, it's a tough conversation to have because you're sitting here, you know, I don't want to say you're overloading me with information, but you're giving me reasonable amounts of information. I'm taking it in, I'm hearing it. And my brain is going in a million different directions where I'm going, oh my gosh, like this is it's so crazy how far reaching some of these things can actually be when you break them down.
Yeah. And this is a huge topic in any kind of psychology research, is the issue of comorbidities, which is basically just looking at the way that, like, for instance, if you have ADHD, you instantly have a much higher percentage chance of having anxiety or depression or any one thing, because it's, you know, if you're suffering in one area, well, disorders and mental illnesses and all these other things come in and they prey on those vulnerabilities, right? And what is ADHD if not a vulnerability? So, yeah, it's a really interesting point because we're talking about ADHD and then you bring it, I was mentioning how, well, you know, even if you don't have it, social media can induce this artificial sense of ADHD, can at very least rise the symptoms of it, which we know from ADHD research is likely to make you more depressed and more anxious. But I think that evidence even stands alone on its own. I don't think it's a coincidence that, I mean, you could obviously correlate it on other things in the economy and our society and whatnot, but I don't think it's a coincidence that all these mental health issues are rising alongside the increasing, you know, I was going to say popularity, but I think a more apt word is relevance, like the relevance of social media in our society, is absolutely increasing these cases, I think, for sure.
Do you think that, so I'm going to say something and I don't know if you'll know the answer, but if you have an opinion on it, you know, you hear a lot about algorithms. It's the new thing you hear. Google algorithms, social media algorithms. You know, I know for a fact that my phone will show me things that I've recently had conversations about. I was having work done in my basement. The guy went to Home Depot or Lowe's to get some ductwork to kind of extend out the HVAC and put a new vent in where there was going to be a new room. Later that day on Reddit, I got an advertisement for Home Depot showing me ductwork. A couple years ago, neighbor came into the house who was a friend. I don't know why I said that. It was so weird. He's not a friend. He's my neighbor. He comes into the house. He goes, oh, man, you got a turntable. Oh, that's awesome, dude. Nice record collection and everything. He sends me a screenshot from his phone a couple hours later, and he goes, dude, he said, I haven't said the word turntable or records or vinyl in I don't know how long. Look at the ad I just got, and it was for a turntable. These algorithms, again, opinion, they affect, I think they affect how we communicate, and I think it pumps things into our brain, right? If I am a staunch, I'm super right wing or super left wing, I think it's, hey, this person leans this way and is more likely to vote this way. And they tend to, I think, want to show me things that further force me into that direction. And so it's like the, what do they call it? The echo chamber, right? And do you think that these companies they've got to know, I feel they've got to be aware of what they're doing. I think they're misusing a lot of these tools. You kind of got to smile like you have an opinion. So
I'm just laughing because you're like, I don't know if you have an opinion on this. I think I have a really strong opinion.
Please give me a really strong opinion, because apparently I have one on it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of where to even start. I mean, because recently, like, I was kind of looking into, like, paid advertising news. I was on the Google Ads Center. Like, it's more anecdotal, but just to sort of, like, start it off. When you're running ads on YouTube, right, you're giving the Ad Center keywords that you think someone is likely to Google, right? So if I want to sell you cars, right, I'm going to type in, okay, I put in the keyword cars, and that's not going to show my advertisement next to people that Google cars. It's going to show my advertisement to people that Google thinks are most likely to Google cars in the future. So if you're Google, or if you're Instagram, if you're TikTok, your goal is to cultivate an audience that is predictable. So it's in your interest to get them addicted to very particular forms of content and narrow in the things they are, because that's what's beneficial for advertisers. It's easier for them to target them. Absolutely, it's interested in creating echo chambers, and it has such a massive effect on the way that we sort of like absorb information and form communities, and ultimately, like we were talking earlier about how thinking of the internet as an analogy to a real place, it's ultimately determining where you live. Right? If I open YouTube right now, my homepage is going to look very, very different than yours. Like, we think we're going to the same website, but we're really not. So it has a massive effect on, like, literally, like, again, if you take that analogy that we use to its extreme, it's literally determining the type of environment that people grow up in. And imagine what a difference it makes to grow up in the United States versus growing up in Rwanda or growing up in China. Like, the country you grow in has a massive impact on who you are as a person. And so if you give the internet that respect as a real place, like, yes, it has a huge impact on who you are. And I think that it's fair to say that it's cultivated and it's motivated. I mean, I've seen research specifically on, like, what's kind of coined as the attention economy, which is a fucking terrifying phrase, honestly.
It really is.
So, like, absolutely, yeah.
So on that note, do you think that they listen to us? Because here's the thing. I've seen the research and all of these big companies, and it comes back and it's like, no, they're not listening. It's just the algorithm and it detects this. And I just don't believe it. I just don't believe that somehow there's not a microphone on, whether it's an Alexa or it's a phone or an app, that something is just hearing these things, because a lot of these things come after conversations. And it's just like,
yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I think that, like, the regular guy inside of me wants to scream absolutely yes. The part of me that studies psychology is really quickly trying to access to remember that it's absurd how often our brain lies to us.
Yeah.
Right? We filter out the vast majority of information. It's like a really important role of the brain is to decide what information is to be considered relevant enough to bring into consciousness, what sort of information we're supposed to, like, pass on. We are processing way more information than we can consciously acknowledge, and we are disposing of the vast majority of it. So when you think about, going back to your example, like, did I Google turntable? Like, did I look at things related to turntables on YouTube? I definitely identify with that exact experience of going, okay, like, I literally said this in a conversation once, and then it comes in my feed 5 days later. There's no way they're in the walls. Like, for sure they're in the walls. But, the other part of me is like, okay, the brain lies to us so often that I don't want to put on my tinfoil hat quite yet. But I don't think that's, like, an unreasonable thought to have. I think maybe like, I don't know, the part of me that wants to dissuade her is that like, can you imagine the fucking legal hell that these companies would be in if that ever got whistleblown one day?
I know. That's why I bring it up, because it's so coincidental. It's like conspiracy theories in a way. It's like, my God, are they listening to us? And you're right. You go, no, they're not. They can't. They'll get busted. Somebody would leak it. But how the hell did they know that? And then I came up with this thing. I'm like, okay, the contractor leaves. The contractor is then in GPS. They know they're at Lowe's or they know they're at Home Depot. And now it comes back. It connects to my Wi-Fi. And it's letting me know things they saw because I'm in close proximity to them. And maybe I'm talking about things with them. Like it right. takes me down that path. And I'm like, oh my God, like, why am I thinking about this shit?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I go back on the day. Like, if you ask me tomorrow, I might say, yeah, they're in the walls for sure. But I think today, if somebody's, like, putting their voice on, like, a public podcast, I'm going to hedge a little bit and be like, well, we tend to forget a lot of stuff, so who knows? But I don't really know, honestly.
Well, let me take a side step for a quick conversation. And I want your opinion. What do you know, if any, about conspiracy theories and why people are attracted to them? Because I will tell you this, there's things that I hear and I'm like, okay, like the big one, I think the one that started it all, at least that I think of, is, JFK assassination. Was there something that happened? And I think that I've seen evidence with my eyes, with the video of what happened, that I've said, okay, I think maybe there was somebody else involved. And I'm not going to get into who or where or what they were because I don't know. But I think that I saw enough to say, I think maybe that one guy in the building isn't what caused some of that. So again, I could be 100% wrong. And maybe it's just with the internet, and maybe it's with social media. I feel like a lot of people are really hell-bent on these conspiracy theories now. And so what made me think of this is what you just said. It's amazing how much our brain forgets. I think that somehow in our heads, we can't explain certain things. 9/11 is a very difficult day to wrap your head around. It's a very hard thing to see visually. People had cameras. It was one of the first major events where a lot of people caught video of that. And it would have been way worse if it happened today. And it's hard to process. And I think it's when it's hard to process trauma and it's hard to process things like that, you try to fill in the blanks. And I think sometimes we fill those blanks in incorrectly. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. I think that that's absolutely a part of it. Like, I agree with you there that for sure that happens, but I also think that there's a lot of other things happening behind the scenes too, in terms of like why conspiracy theories are so attractive, and especially why they've risen so much. One of the things that I say a lot is that the brain appeals to utility over truth, and I think that's true for literally every single person on planet, myself included. Like, I'm a very pragmatic, like, not materialistic in the sense of like consumerism, but like I believe in a material universe. Like, I'm not very religious or superstitious or anything like that. And that isn't because I appeal to truth and science and evidence more than the average person. It's because I found the benefit of being that kind of person more. Like, I think that's what's going on deep down in my brain. So, when we talk about conspiracy theories, I mean, there's a lot of effects going on. I think one of the big ones that's really, really important, which can probably become a whole topic right after this, is the impact of the scale of the internet is really under-discussed, I believe. Like, one effect that is known to happen in sociological studies is just the fact that extremes become more relevant in groups. So if you have, let's say you take 10 people and you ask, okay, are you a flat earth? Hopefully we agree that that's a pretty extreme opinion.
If we have any flat earther people listening, you've got some explaining to do, because I'm not buying a lot. But yes, let's say that's pretty extreme.
And we're interested, but for now you're the butt of the joke.
That's so funny.
But yeah, like, if you ask 10 people, are you likely to be a flat earther? Like, maybe one of them will say yes, right? So you have like a 10% success rate. If you take 10 people and instead of surveying them individually, but you shove them all into a group and you ask them to decide on, is the earth is flat, you're going to see a rate way higher than 10%. You're going to see a rate like 30 or 20 or even 40%. Because what happens is when you're in a group, the group decides that the unanimity of the group is kind of more important than whether or not the Earth is actually flat or not. It's kind of what I was talking about, where we say that we appeal to utility over truth, and the utility of a group is often much, much more higher.
Being part of the group.
Higher, sorry. Yeah, the utility of the group is more important than the utility of having the right opinion on whether or not the Earth is flat or not. And groups on the internet are in the millions, right? So we've created this. I mean, not to. I think we'll get into this after because I don't want to get too off the rails. But just the way that we sort of like fragment information and reorganize it as well is really, really important. Again, if I have a town of 100 people and one of them is a flat earther, well, then one person in every town is a flat earther. But if that one person from every town gets together from 100 different towns, then we have an entire town of flat earthers, right? So we can reorganize our society. Algorithms definitely help in that, by the way, like as we were talking about. So we can leverage scale in a way that really services opinions as far as like how we think they're going to help us. So when it comes to conspiracy theory, to get back to your question after 5 minutes, I think that it's not so much as like it can be trying to make sense of something that you could otherwise not make sense of, kind of similar to what you were talking about with trauma, but it's literally about trying to find some sort of benefit out of the situation. Because if I think 9/11 was just exactly how it was presented to me, or if the JFK assassination was exactly how it was presented to me, what does that do for me, really? Right? I just sit at home and I drink my beer. It's like, oh, that's an exciting thing that happened on the news. Right. If there's a conspiracy, now I have this big thing to dig my energy into, to connect with my friends around, to launch investigations, to get motivated, which is particularly appealing if I'm not really happy with where I am in life. So I think that a big part of conspiracy theory is like the utility that it provides to the person, rather than like some sort of error in how we're perceiving information, right? Because we're deciding what information is relevant, what we're going to filter out, what's going to be the thing that we, dedicate our energy and our interest towards. And sometimes a conspiracy is a more exciting and potentially even beneficial universe to live in, is the one where the conspiracy is true. Yeah. So
that's very interesting. Thank you for that. I had no plans of saying that, but like I said, how the way you were wording that last piece really kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, you know what, that's got me thinking, because I also think conspiracy theorists are getting very lazy. Like somebody points at a wrinkle behind Joe Biden's ear and they're like, look, it's a robot. He's got a mask. And I'm like, are you even fucking trying anymore? Like that's really, we're going to go with that story. So thank you for your input on that one. That's really actually kind of fascinating. And another whole episode you could have on that topic. So, speaking of kind of misinformation, how we ingest it, what we ingest, I think it comes down to trust. Is that, for example, politics, it's really hard to trust politicians anymore. And I don't know why that is. It's maybe because they all yell at each other. One says this, the other says the opposite. Then the next commercial on TV says this about this person in a positive way, where the last one was negative. And it's so much information to process that if you take it for what it's worth and you remove yourself, right? If I know in Canada, you've got 6 political parties, right? 6?
And most of them are fake.
They're not even real. So you have how many? Okay, how many?
Yes, we have 6.
You have 6. How many do you really have?
We really have 3, and if you live in Quebec, you have 4.
Okay.
Kind of.
Okay, thank you. That's a really interesting way of wording that. And
but we do have a kind of similar thing where there's like 2 kind of large dominant ideas, where we have like conservative and liberal opinions, and then you have the NDP, which is sort of like an alt-liberal party.
Okay.
And then you have the last 3 parties hold a lot less significance going on. One of them is the Quebecois Party, which is basically just like a Quebec representative, like federal party, which is a bit weird, but it is what it is.
I think my friend from Saskatchewan was trying to explain that one to me once.
I still don't get why there's a federal provincial party. Anyways,
again, another episode of the Paddy Wagon. But but one of the words you don't hear is trust, and it's like, so when you watch these commercials, and again, I don't know how they are in Canada, but it's brutal here. I mean, my kids are coming up to me, and they're bringing up. I think it's a senator in Pennsylvania, Bob Casey. My daughter's like, I hate Bob Casey. It's like, oh my God. It's like, what do you know about Bob Casey? They keep putting his ads on when I'm trying to watch YouTube. and but you see one for him and against him, for and against, and it's back and forth with all these. So you go, who do I trust, right? Who am I supposed to do that? And I think when you have a lack of trust in everything, it really, and it starts to bleed over into family conversations and family dynamics. And my wife wants to vote for somebody different than me. And I can't believe my mom or my dad has this political opinion. What can we do, if anything, to maybe get some of that trust back and kind of break down those barriers and communicate? Because again, it all comes back to social media. If you want to say YouTube and all these things, like they're force feeding this information to us, and it's really almost impossible. I think it is impossible to digest.
Yeah, I think, two parts to this. I think the first part is that it's actually probably, unfortunately, kind of just how it is to some degree. I think that honestly, in this day and age, it's probably correct to have a little bit of skepticism towards the information that you hear from people in your lives. And I it'd be nice to say otherwise, but I honestly think that's just true. Like, if you are growing up around certain family members, like, you have to kind of expect that it's just like, we talk about how more and more people are misinformed, right? Like, why wouldn't that apply to people in your life? Like, do you think that you escape statistics somehow? So if you have people in your family, yourself included, by the way, it's just more and more likely that you're going to be misinformed. So it's probably healthy to have a little bit of skepticism towards the information that people have and to not trust them. Part two of this, which is hopefully the more uplifting part, is that it's up to you to decide how much this matters. Like an analogy might be like, let's say my girlfriend comes home from work and she's complaining about a coworker, right? Now my job is to be like, oh, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Like I'm supposed to acknowledge how it makes them feel, right? I don't go, okay, hold on, let's make sure you're telling me the truth first, right? Like, you don't need to fact check. Like, think about how well it's going to go over with your wife, right? Like, I know you're mad, but that doesn't matter until I know that you're telling the truth first. So like, kind of like I honestly think this is universally good advice, honestly, is that if you have any sort of like issue in a relationship, one of the best things you can do is you can trade out this intention to convince people with this intention to interview them. So when it comes to like, maybe people at your family dinner aren't as trustworthy anymore, but how much importance you put on like their ability to correctly fact check the information they absorb is kind of up to you. Because what you first want to do is just acknowledge how they feel about it. Right. Going back to that example, even if I know that she's complaining about a coworker and she's saying things about her coworker, and I know her coworker, and it's like almost like, unthinkable that they would have done this. So I kind of know that my wife or my girlfriend or whatever is lying a little bit. You do that afterwards. What you start off with is just acknowledging how they feel. So when people come in with like these ludicrous political opinions or these facts or these reportings, like, just start by acknowledging, like, kind of, you can think, oh, if that's true, that's horrible. Literally just add the if that is true, because then you can participate in the conversation without, feeling like you're placating them and almost lying to them by implying that you believe what they're saying. Right? But if you add that little caveat of like, oh, if that's true, then you're allowing yourself to participate. You're allowing them to express their feelings. Then you can have like a more healthy, less, sort of like charged conversation about it afterwards.
That's good. Great advice.
So yeah,
that's really good advice.
Yeah. So I think it's like two parts. Like, one, like, yes, you probably should be doubting information more, but two, like, make sure that, because like, when a news story comes out or you see something on social media, just like we were talking earlier with shorts, like, it's bullshit information. It's like, there's stories that pass and go. The reason that the stories matter is because they allow you to connect, right? When Trump dances on stage to a song for 40 minutes, like, that doesn't say anything about the future of the country, really. It's just like, when I get to have that conversation with my buddy, like, we get to hang out, we get to, strengthen our bond. Like, that's the real value of these conversations with you and your family. So start with like acknowledging the feelings, trying to interview them a little bit more, and then you can have like a more calm discussion about the facts afterwards. But so often I see people get in these fights with their close family friends where they say something and be like, no, that's not true, you're listening to the wrong news. Like, holy shit, like, back, like, just, you know what I mean? Like, we need to just sort of like back up and acknowledge the person there and the feelings there, and then it's much easier to have a discussion about truth afterwards, right?
Yeah. I said on another episode, and it was, I think it's true, we all want to get to the same place. I think at our core, humans are all wired the same. We want to survive. We want to avoid trouble. We want to avoid danger. We want to live. We want to be happy. I think we all have that. How we get to those points that we want to get to is a different story. But, liberal, conservative, far right wing, far left wing, I think everyone has the idea in their head of what's best. And it may not be my idea, it may not be yours, but this is what I think is best. And I think you're right. If you listen and hear them out and let them speak, I think it's that constant, oh, let me stop you right there, you dumb son of a bitch. There's no way you're right. My news told me. And it's just combative, and all people want to be is heard and have some level of respect and dignity, to where they can say the things, because then they bottle it up. And then we're talking to therapists about how we can't process emotion and we can't talk. And so it's really a nasty cycle, I think, that we're in when it comes to those topics, those hot button topics.
Yeah. And the context and how we process information, like the context and how we have discussions too, really affects the information of it. So like an example of this would be that, if you're prompted to discuss something or do research on something or solve some kind of problem, whatever it is, in an environment where you feel like you're in competition with another person, you're much more likely to have a bias towards performance. If you're doing that with somebody who you feel like doesn't pose a threat to you, you're much more likely to have a bias towards like epistemology, which is essentially like truth seeking, right? So the sort of like underlying emotions behind like why you're having discussion, why you're going into discovery, why you're doing the kind of research you do is going to literally like switch your brain into whatever mode it feels is correct in terms of like, how are we supposed to put forth this information? And especially with how obviously divisive, like a lot of like, we're talking about politics, and it's literally like, I don't think you get to a more pure source of like, what do you want to call it? Like recreational, like debate. I don't even know what to call it, but it's just like,
if that's not a term, it should be, because that's probably what it is.
Yeah. It's like people getting engaged in politics or conspiracy, like any of these sort of things, literally because it has some sort of like recreational or social value, not because the facts really matter to them. It's very, very defensive. Right. And one, like kind of similar to what I was talking about earlier, where you acknowledge the feelings first. One of the things it does is when you get people to stop feeling like they have to perform with their articulation of whatever it is they believe or whatever it is they saw or whatever it is it's true, you instantly bring them back down to this point where they're allowed to explore the truth of it. And one thing that you'll find, like I see this all the time, is that people will, as soon as they're allowed to express their opinion, they instantly are willing to kind of meet you in the middle a little bit. Right. So if you just let a flat earther go off for 3 hours about how the world is flat, you go, oh, wow, really? That's true. I didn't. And then, but like, but I can kind of see the other people, why they think the earth is round. Like instantly, like the second you let them get their opinion out, they're willing to kind of meet you halfway a little bit. And, I guess in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that defensive behavior is way more invisible than we get it credit for. And if you want to have real connections with people, you need to help them feel like they don't have to be defensive as best as you possibly can.
Yeah. Is that they just let everyone have their voice, right?
Yeah, because otherwise they're fighting to validate their existence in a lot of ways, especially if they identify with the things that they're saying, right? Like if you're a flat earther, I don't think anyone's a flat earther casually. I think it's like an identity in a lot of ways. And so if you're denying them the ability to think the earth is flat, you're not just disagreeing with a piece of information. You're denying an important part about how they identify themselves, right? So now they're fighting to exist on the planet. They're fighting for survival.
Well, what's being said to them? You're crazy. You're stupid.
Exactly.
You don't know anything. It's none of them are positive. I don't think that is, because that to me is such my opinion, right? That is such an insane debate of whether it's just, I can't see any validity to that. I'll say in my opinion. I always tell people my opinion. My opinion shouldn't matter. It's my opinion. And I'm entitled to it like you're allowed to yours. So if you're a flat earther right now and you're telling me these things, I would hear you out respectfully. I would hope I wouldn't make a face that led you to believe that like this guy's not taking me serious. But I think people just want to be heard.
Yeah, and we so often have this view that like, oh, they're too stupid to see. But like as I was talking about, like everything is motivated, right? What we believe is true is motivated by the utility that we see in it. And so, when you're having this debate of truth, you're not. It's such like an auxiliary discussion towards like the real issue, which is that like they're a person that wants to feel validated, and if you don't validate them, then you're never ever going to be able to close that gap in a million years.
Yeah, I love being wrong and acknowledging when I'm wrong. I love being wrong.
That it sounds like fake humbleness, but honestly, like I love being wrong.
I learn more when I'm wrong. And I think people learn more when they're wrong. And I think it's very difficult. And with young children, I try to teach them it's okay to not be right. Like you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers, But when what I do with their grades, my son is a straight A student. He's older. My daughter, a little bit younger, and she would, she's younger. So it was like 1, 2, 3, and 4 and so on. And so it was, right. I'm trying to think of this. Maybe the 4 was the better of the scores versus the 1. And so I never cared. If my kid has a C, I'm not going to yell at them, but I'm going to say, well, how can we make that C a B? What can we do to make that be an A, right? So let's little baby steps at a time. How can we change that? I'm not going to yell. Yeah. I don't care that you got the C, but
I think that's great. I mean, like, in this, obviously I have a huge bias here because this is kind of what I practice in like coaching work is like this kind of strategy, but I don't think that's for no reason. I don't think that, clinical research is limited to clinics. And, I believe so strongly in advice that we should stop convincing people and start interviewing them.
Just get to know them. Let them speak. Let them speak. Yeah.
Like, I really think that's like such good blanket advice for how we can handle relationships is to move to that interviewing bias for sure. So yeah, like asking questions about how we can go from A to B is like so much better than being like, okay, well, you got to get to a B because now I'm taking away your freedom. I'm taking away your autonomy. I'm not, acknowledging any of the struggles that you have there. And, so that's a great way to sort of approach anything with your kids or with anyone.
Yeah. With the kids, I mean, what do we, and again, I mean, I'm looking into the future here, but is there anything that you can see that we can do to combat some of these trends that we're seeing as it relates to social media and to, just pressure from the online world? Does go outside and play matter anymore?
Go outside and play matters a lot. But like when we're talking about kids specifically, I think that there are honestly like really good child development workshops that exist for a lot of parents. Like you might have even been to one. Like I know my mom talks about how she went to them a lot as they were a kid, but like they're really good. Like they teach you a lot about how you can raise kids. Like I seriously think that every parent should, if they don't know they exist, should really start researching into like child development workshops. And really just kind of, like, not that I want to be seen as the authority, but like, what we've talked about in this podcast or anywhere else that you can get information to relate these subjects, find a way to take these topics and integrate them into like the kind of like techniques and information that they teach you in these child development workshops. Because, the simple answer would be just like take away their phones and take away their tablets, but that only works so long, right? It only works until they can get to the local library, until they can borrow their kids' phones. Like you can't, it's really hard to control kids by just, suppressing their autonomy. And so finding a way to sort of use like what we know about child development and like parenting techniques and integrate like this kind of consciousness about like how dangerous the internet can be into the strategies that they teach you there, I think is honestly like a really good step.
It's really good advice. Very good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no textbook for raising a kid. There isn't. And every kid's a little different. What worked for one may not work for the other. And I think it's a lot. You just kind of feel each person out. But yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. It sounds like there's some kind of a baseline of here's things that you can do to not only be a better parent, like how can I get better? What can I do to be better? But help your kids be better and let them grow into the people that we want to see them grow into, and not kind of shackle them with our own, self-interest or, being able to run around and show everyone I'm the world's best parent, but that's really good advice. I mean, listen, if you know of any links or any places like that, we'll link it to this episode as well. So that's, thank you for that. That's really interesting. I don't think I knew that existed. If I look at it, I think I assumed it did.
They're really good too. Like they teach you really cool stuff. Just like the importance, like, what ages, they start changing, like the way that their executive functions work. Sort of like, I'm trying to think if there's a better word for it than like self-awareness, but like the difference between like egocentric and non-egocentric thinking, the importance of like autonomy and supporting autonomy, but also like personality, like something that sounds kind of weird, but is so true, is that like by the time your kid's 7 years old, like 9% of the personality is formed.
Oh, damn it, my daughter. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, you have like, I mean, this is one of the things that I appreciate the most, like the older I get, is like just like I'm like terrified of like how similar I am to my mom. Like it's crazy. Yeah, like I don't know. I would just say like go look for like child development workshops and really integrate like your personal interest and the kind of things that you learn in podcasts like this or wherever else you learn them into those workshops so that your children can sort of navigate the internet in a way that isn't you just trying to desperately steer them away from all the dangerous parts of it because you're in a losing battle.
Yeah,
you'll never win in that
yeah.
fight.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yet again, you've kind of you've led into kind of the next thing I was thinking is advice for listeners on how they can be more mindful about the way they communicate through social media, through the internet. What are things that we can do to just try to get over some of these, I guess, humps, if you want to call them that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's one of the, we talked earlier about, like, we're bringing this back for the third time now, but I think it's a really good analogy is to think of the internet as a real place. I think that's a really good place to start, because if you think forward into the future about your life, right? Like, imagine if you're like, okay, I'm going to live in this town. I'm going to live in New Jersey for the next 20 years. If I ask you to do that, you can instantly think about, like, what that does to your life. Because you can think about what kind
Have
of
you
job
ever been to New
opportunities
Jersey?
It's
fucking not good. So pick a different.
But I've watched The Sopranos like 5 times, so I basically have.
That's so funny.
What am I trying to say? Yeah. But yeah, like if you think about where you're going to live for the next 20 years, you instantly imagine like what is my community going to look like? What job opportunities are present? Like where am I going to live? And I think the community part of that is the most important because one of the big dangers of the internet is that it kind of supplements social needs a lot of the time, right? I was talking earlier about how we can like fragment communities in a way where we can like recreate towns of like any opinion that we want. So no matter how crazy your opinion is, you'll be able to find some sort of group of people that's in that, like that's organized online because the internet just allows us to instantly reorganize all of our communities. So whether you're into like that recreational political debate or whether you're, following some YouTube stream, like some, gaming stream every day or whether you're getting a lot of followers on Instagram because you're really fashionable, like you should start thinking about the internet as a real place that you're living. And so if you're going to live on Instagram for the next 20 years where you get all of your social needs validated by having people approve like your clothing choices and like your makeup or you're like how good you are at a video game or whatever it is that's getting you those followers and those clicks or even if you're just a member of that community on the audience side of it and you're part of the debates, you feel like you have the superior opinions, whatever it is. What is your community going to look like in 20 years as a result of you living in this place? Because like that's a really big problem that we have, right? Is that like, you can disappear into the internet and have a lot of fun and explore your choices, but at some point you're going to come out and your real goals aren't going to be assisted by this in any way. Whether you want to raise a family or whether you want to start your own business, whatever it is, like you're going to have to drop that behind. And so really think of the internet as like a real place that you're deciding to be and understand that is going to affect your options in your community and your opinions. Because if you have the best political opinion in the world, but you take it to family dinner and it completely isolates you because nobody knows what the fuck you're talking about because you're deep diving into these like political theories that nobody in the real world around you understands. How is that helping your sense of community? It's just helping you engage in this online activity that isn't going to be there for you in 20 years from now. So think of it as a real place, give it that respect, and where you live is going to affect who you are. So make sure you're choosing wisely.
That's really good advice. That's really good advice. And I appreciate that. And I know the listeners appreciate that because, this is an episode I've been kind of looking for. I didn't know I was looking for it, but I knew I was looking for it is because it's something that I think we're all affected by it. Even when you're in it and you forget that you're in it.
Yeah, and we're only really touching the surface.
Oh,
too. Like,
I know.
Like you said at the start, this could easily be 5 hours long.
Oh, goodness. And there's so many avenues from a technology discussion to the mental health. It's just, it's not a good place to be a lot of the time. So, like Justin says, make the most of it, choose wisely, and treat it as a real place. I think that's really, really good advice and some that personally I will take too. So, well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I'd like to get wrapped up here if you're okay with it. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And as always, one of the most important things here in my sense of community is I try to create a community on this podcast. And one of the reasons I do the podcast is because it is fucking awesome talking to new people. I love talking to people. I love meeting people and having a drink with people and just, seeing what's out there, man. And the other part of that is I have genuine joy in if I'm able to help any of my guests in any way, whether it's if you're looking to talk with somebody, if you're looking for, and I know you hate this term from what you said, a coaching session or somebody to talk with, I think that you are a great resource. And if you've listened to this episode, you hear how easy this guy is to talk to. He's obviously super intelligent and uses, I think one of the things that I enjoy is the analogies. I'm an analogy person, and I think it gets people to, oh, I never thought about it like that. That's a really good point, right? So, and I've said that a couple times. I'm like, that's a really interesting way of looking at that. So, listen, man, tell our people where they can find you. Of course, before you do, we'll plug everything. You don't have to take notes. You can look at the show notes, the summary. I will list this guy's everything, all his social media, website, and so on. Justin, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, my website is soliliumcoaching.com. It's spelled really weirdly, so just check the description. On social media, I just go by Solilium Thoughts. But yeah, if you just Google Solilium, if you just, search in social Solilium Thoughts, or you go to my website, it'll have all my links there too. That's where you can find me. I'm doing free consultations right now too, if you go to my website and you're interested in like private, like one-on-one coaching sessions. And that's pretty much
awesome, man.
Not to drag out your podcast too long, but just something I love to mention at the end of that with analogies is like a really cool body of research is how analogies affect the way we think, and how technology specifically assists the way that we think about things. So like one thing that that I think is really cool is how the existence of video games, just because of their abilities to serve as an analogy, changes the way we think. And now if you go back into like the Industrial Revolution, it was all about like factories and machineries. And if you go back further, it's into like the technology available actually changes our ability to access concepts because we depend on analogies so much and how we think about it.
That was really interesting. That was really interesting. And then I will say this, you could never drag my podcast out too long. I always say around an hour to be respectful for people's time. I'm looking at the time right now. I mean, it's gone over an hour, and I really do appreciate that. Like I said, it's been fun talking with you. I can't wait to get the episode up and have some people listen to it. And like I said, we'll get some people coming your way. And yeah, man, it's been great talking with you and great getting to know you, buddy.
Yeah, I had a great conversation.
All right, buddy. Really well, cheers to you, my friend. And yeah, we'll talk again soon. Have a great day.
Sounds good.